Before a single European or American explorer set foot into Utah, this land was home to 5 Native American nations. But over time, their homelands would shrink to a fraction of their size into small reservations. There were tens of thousands of Native Americans living in Utah just before the first explorers came into the land. But after contact between these two groups, the natives' world was devastated. Lands were taken, there were wars, several massacres, and disease epidemics. Some estimate that over half of Utah's Native American population died or more. I'm a Native American and I'm from Utah, and I've been on this journey of trying to learn more about myself. There's parts of this story that I was never taught growing up, and the deeper I go, the more I realize how much was lost. So this video is about the tragic history of Utah's 5 Native American tribes. Utah has a rich history of geology and ancient peoples. Before the first humans arrived, much of it existed underwater by Lake Bonneville. After the lake started declining, we start seeing the first Paleo-Indian and archaic hunter-gatherers. Now, it might be tempting to think of them as just wanderers, but really, they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew their routes, they knew the lands, the animals, and the seasons intimately. But that hunting and gathering lifestyle would change due to the introduction of farming. Maize, squash, and later beans became known as the 3 sisters of agriculture. And as the people started blending farming and hunting together, we start seeing a group that we call the Fremont culture. And this is the main group that left behind many of the haunting rock imagery scattered throughout Utah. However, eventually, due to climate change and drought, the Fremont began to disperse as new groups came into the land. Numic-speaking people came from the west, becoming what we know today as the Utes, Shoshone, Paiutes, and Goshutes. So their language was similar, and a few of them could even understand each other. From the north came my ancestors, Athabascan speakers from northwestern Canada and Alaska, becoming what is today the Navajo and the Apache. The Navajo are the only tribe in Utah that spoke from a different language family. And so we see the formation of Utah's 5 native tribes. The Paiute lived across much of southern and central Utah, and they were skilled desert peoples. The Ute occupied the mountains and the valleys of eastern Utah, and they became powerful horse warriors. The Shoshone lived mainly in the mountains and plains up north, and they had trade networks that spanned from the coast to the plains. The Goshute lived in the harsh deserts to the west, and while they were small, they were masters of the desert life. And lastly, my tribe, the Navajo, or Dene as we call ourselves, they lived mostly in the southeast, in the Red Rock canyons and high deserts. And they were warriors who eventually became sheep herders and famous blanket makers. Some of these tribes were hunter-gatherers following the seasons, animal migrations, and plant harvests, while others added a bit of farming to the mix. Houses varied from wooden wickiups to the Navajo hogans, with the Shoshone and Utes later adopting teepees. Just before Europeans arrived, population estimates for each tribe are very, very roughly the Navajo around 12,000, Ute around 10,000, Shoshone around 6,000, Paiute around 8,000, and Goshute around 1,500. Again, those are rough estimates. And while there was fighting between these different tribes, especially the Utes and the Navajo, many lived peacefully and even shared hunting grounds. But all this would drastically change with a new group coming into the land. Utah's Native American way of life would tragically change after the Spanish discovered the Americas. and they'd soon make their way up to the New Mexico area. Now, even though the Spanish didn't come to Utah in any significant way for a couple hundred years after that, the natives likely knew of the presence of a new people from down south, and they also likely interacted with some Spanish traders. One of the first major expeditions by the Spanish came in 1776, when the Dominguez and Escalante party came all the way up to Utah Valley and met the Timpanogos tribe there. Dominguez actually wrote back to the king how Utah would be an ideal settlement for future Spanish colonies. But obviously they never ended up making it up that far, and the Spanish occupation in Utah itself was very light. One major development was the Old Spanish Trail, ranging from Santa Fe to Los Angeles. This route greatly affected Native American trade and even the dark history of Native American slavery. But eventually, Mexico fought and won its independence from Spain. But with so few interactions up here, the Native Americans here in Utah continued to control most of their lands. One of the biggest changes to Native Americans in the West was the introduction of the horse. The Spanish brought the horse to New Mexico, and they soon spread north into Utah and beyond. For the Ute and northern Shoshone, the horse was revolutionary. They were better able to hunt, better able to trade, and better able to fight. However, for some tribes like the Paiute and Goshute, the horse wasn't really that useful. And this was mainly because of their desert environment. There simply wasn't enough resources to breed or maintain horses. And the horse could even eat and trample their food, and in rare cases, the horse was even better as food. So due to the power that the horses gave to tribes like the Shoshone and the Utes, they were better able to enter the slave trade by stealing women and children from the desert Paiute and Goshutes to be sold to Spanish and Mexican traders. The slave trade was brutal, tearing apart families, and it became an important part of the economy for some tribes, like the Utes along the Old Spanish Trail. But more tragedy would fall upon Utah natives when a new group started coming into their lands. Due to heavy persecution and the murder of their leader, Joseph Smith, Latter-day Saint pioneer refugees, also known as Mormons, fled the United States and entered the Salt Lake Valley under the leadership of Brigham Young. Things started to quickly get complicated for the Native Americans in Utah. And this is a part of Utah's history that can be hard, especially for me as both a Latter-day Saint and a Native American. The Latter-day Saint side of the story has been promoted over and over again, even to the point that we have a state holiday called Pioneer Day, celebrating their arrival. But for natives, that can be a day signaling the beginning of the end. And their side of the story isn't really told. And that's what I hope to do on this channel. I do think the Saints tried to work with the natives. Brigham Young would say that it was cheaper to feed the Indians than to fight them. And we need to remember that the Saints were violently forced out of their homes, fleeing like refugees for safety. So they weren't really initially acting like many colonizers do, or greedy gold seekers do, or like how government armies go out to try to claim land. There's good that the Saints tried to do, but unfortunately, much of it failed due to two different ways of how they treated the land. I also think that the Saints lived in a culture of racism that most American white settlers dealt with at that time. This was the time of African slavery and white superiority. The Saints even passed a law that seemingly legalized Indian slavery, but it's much more complicated than that. Brigham Young's motive for it was to try to save Native American women and children from the slave trade. He would share an account of how a Ute warrior tried to sell two Paiute slave children to some Saints. And when the Saints refused, the Ute warrior killed one of the children and demanded that they pay to save the other. So Brigham Young and church leaders legalized the act for the relief of Indian slaves and prisoners by offering servitude instead of slavery to protect natives from the Mexican slave trade and to offer them the chance to be set free later. But while the saints may have tried, major disasters still followed. Within 10 years after the saints first arrived into Utah, 16 towns were built inside Native American territories. Soon there were tens of thousands of Latter-day Saints in the Utah area, and these two different groups with completely different ways of living tried to share land and resources. And this led to disaster after disaster. Whereas natives would travel between areas to hunt and farm, the saints would settle and stay in an area. So these lands, commonly assumed by natives to be grounds to share, were basically cut off from them. And this is why you start to see many starving and desperate natives taking cattle from the saints, just as they would probably take deer or other animals on their hunting lands. So tensions over lands quickly erupted into violence, with good and bad people on both sides. So, for example, just 2.5 years after the saints first arrived in Utah, Utah Valley became a war zone, as Native Americans, frustrated that their sacred valley of fish and hunting and food was taken over by Fort Utah. Things escalated where natives stole some cattle, they fired some shots, the saints retaliated, and some settlers even killed a Native American. And eventually the Battle of Fort Utah happened, resulting in around 50 to 100 Timpanogos natives being killed and many more being forced out of Utah Valley. Then there was the Walker War, resulting in up to 100 deaths. Then there was the Black Hawk War, and this was the largest, deadliest, costliest war. Utes and other tribes allied, hundreds were killed, and hundreds more were affected by starvation and displacement. Part of this war involved the Circleville Massacre, where a local militia panicked and killed some Paiute prisoners of men, women, and children. Then there was the Bear River Massacre, which happened on the northern Utah-Idaho border. Although it was carried out by the federal army, it was influenced in part by tensions between Latter-day Saints and Native Americans. Hundreds of innocent Shoshone were killed in one of the worst massacres of Native Americans in U.S. history. There were other massacres of both natives and settlers, but ultimately by the late 1800s, most tribes had been forced onto reservations or scattered into different areas. But while open conflict was ending, Native American losses were far from over. Tragedy for Native Americans living in Utah shifted from the Spanish to the Latter-day Saints and then to the federal government, which was arguably the worst perpetrator of tragedy to Native Americans. The reservation system was supposed to help protect native lands, but in reality it became a tool for taking them. It left natives with some of the worst lands in the state. Federal boarding schools removed native children from their families, punishing them for speaking their languages or practicing their traditions. The federal government even assigned tribes to different Christian denominations for conversion, controlling their spiritual life. And many bad policies followed as well. There was the Dawes Act of 1887, which broke up Native American land and sold the extra land away. Then there was the termination era of the 1950s, led by Utah Senator Arthur Watkins, which attempted to remove tribal powers and assimilate them into American culture. Paiutes and Utes lost their recognition and much more. And while some of it has been restored, some things like land have not. Over the years, each tribe suffered losses. Imagine your citizenship being taken away, your home being taken away, and the justice system simply not restoring it for decades, if at all. Utah's Native American tribes suffered tragedy after tragedy. Today, the Paiute, the Navajo, Ute, Shoshone, and Goshute have only gained a fraction of what was lost. But how do we move on? On my channel, I'm on this journey to rediscover my Native American roots and the Native American future. So I'm going to make a video for each one of these tribes to help us better learn more. So please subscribe and join me on this journey of exploring that ancient history of the West. And if you want to learn more about the ancient Fremont people that were here before these 5 tribes, check out this video. Thanks for watching.